Until 2 years ago, this was a seasonal wetland north of Willits, California. Little Lake Valley was once the home of the Pomo Indians. They harvested the bulb of the blue camas flower and fished salmon in the 5 creeks that run through here. Then Gold Rush era settlers forced them out to graze their cows. Now, much of this has been destroyed by the construction of a freeway bypass. Wetlands, however, are federally protected. The filled-in acreage must be replaced by new wetlands in a process of mitigation. This is part of the story of how politicians, bureaucrats, and Caltrans, the California Department of Transportation, are creating a second disaster in August 2015. Instead of making new wetlands, existing wetlands are being destroyed by bulldozer as so-called mitigation. In that process, 19 Indian archeological sites are also being bulldozed.
Caltrans purchased 2,000 acres. They went on a buying spree about 4 years ago because they knew that the Army Corps of Engineers was going to require them to mitigate for the wetlands that they were filling along the route of the bypass, which is right here. This is the northern interchange. So Caltrans bought up everything that they could get from a willing seller out in the valley, and it turned out that almost all of the land they purchased was already a functioning wetland. So then the difficulty began of how to turn what Caltrans purchased into a credible mitigation plan. And I'm going to show you some pictures of what's happening out there. Lots of politics went down between 2007 and 2012 when the Army Corps mitigation plan was finally approved. And as a result of politics instead of science, there is all kinds of heartbreaking grading and removing of vegetation and scalping on the mitigation lands. Now, everything to the northeast of Willits, not everything, but a good portion of it has been purchased by Caltrans and is now being squeezed in one way or another to eke out some mitigations for this bypass. Through that part of the valley, the major creeks run. Davis Creek, which comes out of Morris Reservoir, right here. And so a big part of Davis Creek is in the Caltrans mitigation lands. Outlet Creek is over here. So these 2 creeks are areas that we're going to look at here in these pictures. Along these creeks, you can see, are these light blue areas. And these are some of the wetland creation areas, about half of them. And they were the second string wetland creation areas. In other words, there is no credible science, at least not from the agency scientists, including the Army Corps of Engineers scientists, that these areas were really good candidates for creation of wetlands, because they're already smack dab in the wetlands and next to the creeks. However, when Caltrans tried to offer activities for the rest of these lands as a compensation for what they were doing here, they didn't come up, you have to have enough, you have to do enough to compensate for the number of acres of wetlands filled in, which was about 90. And Caltrans kept coming up short. They couldn't find enough credits. So in the last months of the formulation of the mitigation plan, the Army Corps' wrist was twisted by the political system, and they finally gave in and agreed to give Caltrans credit for turning these areas into wetlands. And what that means in a wetland is you dig them out so that the surface of the ground is closer to the water table. Since the definition of a wetland is 12 inches from the surface, if you've got something that's 15 or 16 inches from the surface, or 2 feet from the surface, you go in there and dig it out so that the water table in the rainy season is only a few inches from the surface. So let's start with that. So this is a riparian area along Davis Creek. Very important element of an ecosystem because it holds the creek banks in place. It provides habitat for all kinds of birds and animals that need to be close to water as well. So riparian habitat is precious, and this is what has been done to it in the last 2 weeks. All the vegetation scraped off and the dirt scraped down to various levels depending on where they need to go deeper. Now keep in mind, the scientists said this isn't legitimate wetland creation. Even though the water table was a little bit lower than a normal wetland, it was because these areas are near creeks, as you can see. And in the normal course of events, the creeks flood their banks in a heavy rain. They spread out into the field. The water slows down. They drop their sediments, and they pile up. The scientists from the Army Corps of Engineers said, we never give credit for wetland creation in areas like this because it's the fact that it's a little higher is a natural phenomena, and if you scrape it away, eventually those sediments will come back as the creeks flood again. So that's not true creation, but they were overridden by political pressure in the final weeks of creating this plan. So Caltrans has created a barren landscape out there, and they have the responsibility now of returning it to something that functioned like this was functioning 2 weeks ago. You know, the vegetation, the topsoil, all the nutrients in the top layer of soil were all piled up in piles like that. Truck after truck after truck, they've been trucked by taking this topsoil, this vegetation, this dirt, and dumping it over on East Side Road. Here's a panorama. It looks gray here, but it was taken in the evening. And you can just keep going through that. Just a little look at Caltrans restoration equipment. This is another view of the mountain of probably centuries of accumulated richness from our valley floor. Another thing the retired Corps biologist told me is in soils like this, that are denuded like this, you're inviting invasive plants, and in particular, blackberries. The other thing I want to point out, all of this earth moving was done without a survey of archeological sites. And even though in some instances, and I'm not sure it was the case here, monitors from the tribes were allowed to be present, things happened so fast that it was almost impossible to tell what was going on. So who knows what's in those piles of dirt? Who knows what artifacts, what history, what cultural heritage has been shipped off to East Side Road and possibly used to fill the northern interchange.
Oh, what? I need this?
Yeah.
Oh. So then, so what Ellen was presenting, that's what they're doing to these other areas. And in these other areas, there's a lot of archeological sites of our ancestors. Caltrans is supposed to do all types of surveys before they'd done any of that work. It's not only the critters and the plants and so on, what Ellen was talking about. It's our ancestors' villages. And it's like history repeats itself right out there, you know, and it's 2015, you know, and like, you know, it's just really sad. And we've gone to the media, we've gone to the Army Corps, Water Board, all the way around, and what they do is they say, we don't have jurisdiction, we can't do anything, so they point their fingers back and forth.
Okay. So anyway, the tribe has called by letter and by tribal resolution for the cessation of all ground disturbing activities in the mitigation parcels, which contain 19 already identified sites of her people, the Pomo people. And they're discovering, and they discover more sites every time a bulldozer hits the ground. But now they're trying to avoid discovering sites. So they've changed up the lithic concentration ratios. Generally, if you have 3 to 5 arrowheads and spear points in a given area, you have to stop. And under CEQA, you stop. You then start to survey that parcel, and you mark it off to be protected from any future ground disturbing activities. But now, by recent communication, we have been told that they're no longer doing site identification. They will only do site identification when all the grading is completed. And this is turning CEQA ass backwards. CEQA requires that once a certain lithic concentration is discovered, you stop, you survey, you protect. Now what we have is our monitors running behind the bulldozers, sifting through soil, and grabbing an arrowhead here, a metate there, and trying to hold on to the data. Let's take it back to day one in this madness. They identified one site in 2006 after surveys that were done in the springtime when the grass was yay high, okay? You're supposed to do these surveys in the winter. Okay, they didn't put one trowel to soil, but they identified one site. Now they've identified 30, 19 of which are in the mitigation parcels. And there are many more out there. But now they've changed up the ratio of lithic concentration for site identification, deviating substantially from the established norms of archaeologists in the state of California. Had they done the adequate surveys prior to the EIS, I believe this project would never have been approved because there are so many sites. So we come to you. Why are we here today? Because in any part in my professional career where I've dealt with a coalition of environmentalists and indigenous concerns, it's a very strong coalition because we know you are the good-hearted people who care for Mother Earth as deeply as we do. And I have always seen it been a winner when the two forces combine. So although it's been an awful experience with the agencies, it's been an awful experience with Caltrans, I keep on saying we have the dignity of taking the stand. And it has been a wonderful, it's a weird thing to say, but it's been a wonderful experience working with our environmental allies from the Willits community. And we're here tonight to plead for your standing with the original inhabitants of the Little Lake Valley, and to know that it's all part and parcel of the same struggle. The struggle to protect the rivers is a struggle to preserve indigenous culture. And ultimately, all of you at one point were indigenous. So please, your ancestors, so please join with us in protecting our ancestors. And that's why we're here tonight, is we need your help.